It was a crime that rocked the nation, a brutal act that left an entire family dead in a house that would become infamous. On the night of November 13, 1974, Ronald DeFoe Jr. entered Henry's Bar in Amityville, Long Island, frantic and out of breath. What DeFoe said next would echo through the history of American crime. Quote, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot." End quote. Ronald Joseph DeFoe Jr., or Butch as he was known to his friends, was the eldest of 5 children in the DeFoe family. He lived in the sprawling 3-story home of 112 Ocean Avenue, a house that stood just blocks from the bar where he delivered the alarming news. But when DeFoe led a group of friends back to his home that night, the scene they found was beyond comprehension. Welcome. I'm John Cordray, and I'm a mental health therapist. And today I will be analyzing the case of Robert DeFoe and the Amityville murders. I will provide my speculation, not a diagnosis, of Ronald DeFoe Jr. This is Inside Killer Minds. As a therapist, it's impossible to overlook the complexity behind Ronald DeFoe Jr.'s tragic story. His actions in November 1974 remain some of the most horrifying in modern history, and for decades, many have sought to understand how someone could carry out such an act of atrocity. DeFoe, known simply by many as Butch, was a 23-year-old man at the time. On the evening of November 13th, 1974, he rushed into Henry's Bar just steps away from his family home at 112 Ocean Avenue. He frantically declared his mom and dad had been shot. At that moment, he appeared to be a concerned son, in shock, seeking help from anyone who would listen. But as we know, the reality was much more sinister. Upon arriving at the DeFoe residence, DeFoe and others found the bodies of his parents and his siblings. 6 people in total: his father, Ronald Sr., his mother, Louise, and his sisters, Dawn and Allison, and his younger brothers, Mark and John. All shot in their beds, face down, in the early morning around 3 a.m. The murders were carried out with precision. Each family member was killed swiftly, many without time to even awaken. As a mental health professional, the horror of the crime raises many questions. What was Butch thinking? And more critically, what led him to believe that murder was the solution to his problems? Initially, he tried to blame a mob hitman, Louis Fellini, claiming his family had been the target of organized crime. But the inconsistencies of his story became evident as detectives interrogated him. Within 24 hours, the truth emerged. DeFoe confessed. He said, quote, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast," unquote. DeFoe told authorities that on the evening of November 13, 1974, he returned home around 6 p.m. to find the door locked. Unable to enter, he made that fateful decision to crawl through the window, only to stumble upon a scene of unimaginable horror. His entire family, 6 members in total, lay dead, their bodies riddled with bullets. But this was not the whole truth. Hours later, under the weight of investigation, Ronald DeFoe Jr. confessed. In a chilling detail, he described how around 3:30 a.m., he systematically shot his family one by one. He even reenacted the murders for the detectives, recounting his every move. The murder weapon, later discovered in Amityville Creek, sealed his fate. His trial began in October 1975, where his defense attorney, William Weber, introduced the idea of insanity. DeFoe, Weber argued, was not in control of his actions. He allegedly heard voices that commanded him to kill his family. As a mental health professional, we often ask ourselves, how could such voices manifest? And what reality do they create for the person who hears them? Yet, the prosecution's expert saw through a different lens. While DeFoe was an admitted LSD and heroin user, the expert testified that he was still legally sane at the time of the murders. Drug use, though harmful, could not obscure the fact that he understood his actions. He knew right from wrong, and he chose violence. On November 21, 1975, the jury rejected the insanity plea. They found Ronald DeFoe Jr. guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. His sentence, 6 concurrent terms of 25 years to life, reflected the depth of his crime. This was not a case of someone who momentarily snapped. It was far more complex. DeFoe, in his confession, admitted he cleaned up after the murders. He took a bath, changed his clothes, and discarded the evidence before heading to work, as if nothing had happened. It was a calculated attempt to cover his tracks, though perhaps not fully thought through. During his trial in 1974, DeFoe's defense lawyer tried to admit an insanity defense. But as a therapist, these pleas always carry a deep emotional weight. Insanity suggests a disconnection from reality, a mind that lost its ability to differentiate between right and wrong. In DeFoe's case, he claimed he didn't remember committing the murders. However, the psychiatrist for the prosecution, Dr. Harold Zolan, argued that DeFoe, despite his history of drug use and his antisocial personality disorder, he was fully aware of his actions. The question that often lingers is what drives someone to this point. DeFoe had a history of tension with his father, Ronald Sr., a dominating figure in the household. It's possible that years of familiar dysfunction, emotional abuse, and drug addiction converged into a perfect storm. But as with many violent acts, the exact trigger remains elusive, locked away in the inner workings of DeFoe's mind. After a month-long trial, the jury found DeFoe guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life. For the next 4 decades, DeFoe would remain incarcerated at Sullivan Correctional Facility, never seeing freedom again. He tried appealing his conviction multiple times, but all of his requests were denied. Ronald DeFoe Jr. passed away on March 12, 2021 at Albany Medical Center. He was 69 years old. The cause of his death has not been publicly released, but his death marks the end of one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. It's easy to sensationalize a case like this. The media attention, the supernatural elements surrounding the house after the fact, it all contributes to the intrigue. But at the heart of it, we must remember that real lives were lost. A family was wiped out in a single night, and the ripple effects of the violence have lasted decades. It's a sobering reminder of how untreated mental illness, unresolved trauma, and untreated anger can culminate in tragedy. The DeFoe case stands as a chilling example of what happens when these factors collide, leaving us to wonder, could this have been prevented? And if so, how many others can we help before it's too late? When we look at cases like that of Ronald DeFoe Jr., we're often drawn to the question of why. Why would someone kill their entire family? What was going on inside of his mind? What led him to commit such a horrific act? The relationship between Ronald DeFoe Jr. and his father, Ronald Sr., was volatile. The elder DeFoe was known to be controlling and domineering. This dynamic, rooted in years of tension, would have undoubtedly shaped Butch's emotional and psychological development. Yet despite the obvious strain, DeFoe's exact motive for the killings remains unclear. Details led the prosecution to suggest that Ronald's motive may have been financial, a desire to escape his father's control while benefiting from the life insurance policies of both of his parents. In the mind of someone like DeFoe, who had long lived under the shadow of his father's authority, this could have been seen as an opportunity for freedom and escape. But that theory doesn't fully account for the complexity of what unfolded that night. After his conviction, DeFoe's explanations for the murders became increasingly convoluted. Each new version of the events presented a different psychological picture of the man who committed them. In an interview in 1986, Ronald DeFoe claimed that it wasn't him who carried out all of the murders. He stated that his sister Dawn was the one who killed their father, and that their mother, distraught and overwhelmed, had killed the other siblings. According to DeFoe, he only shot his mother in a moment of reaction, taking blame out of fear. As a therapist, this narrative is striking. The shifting blame, the attempt to reshape his role in the murders, they all suggest a deep conflict within DeFoe. Perhaps he was grappling with the weight of his actions, unable to fully process the enormity of what he had just done. By shifting the blame to his sister and mother, he may have been trying to reconcile his own guilt and distance himself from the horror of the crime. But what's most notable is the influence of his extended family, specifically his fear of his mother's father and his father's uncle, Peter DeFoe, in the Genovese crime family. Ronald claimed that his fear kept them from telling the truth, that he was afraid that they would kill him if he spoke ill of his mother. In therapy, this kind of fear points to the powerful influence of familiar dynamics, especially in families with connections to organized crime. The layers of control, fear, and retaliation likely weighed heavy on Ronald's psyche. DeFoe's claim that he had been married at the time of the murders adds another complex layer. He described a woman named Geraldine Gates, who supposedly lived with him in New Jersey. According to him, his mother called him that night, asking him to return to Amityville to break up a fight between his sister Dawn and their father. He even claimed that Geraldine's brother Richard Ramado accompanied him to the house and could verify his story. This evolving story gives us insight to DeFoe's fractured state of mind. The repeated changes in his narrative show someone who was constantly trying to make sense of his own actions, trying to find an explanation that might absolve him of his responsibility. But this also points to a mind that had long been at odds with itself. A mind battling deep-rooted fear, guilt, and perhaps even shame. In therapeutic terms, Defoe's shifting stories could indicate a dissociative response to the trauma he both experienced and inflicted. Disassociation occurs when an individual disconnects from reality to avoid the emotional impact of their actions. In cases of extreme stress or guilt, people may distort their memories or shift the blame in an attempt to protect themselves from the overwhelming emotions they cannot bear. In this way, Defoe's psyche may have been fragmented, unable to cope with the sheer weight of what he had done. His ever-changing accounts of that night's events reveal a man deeply entrenched in denial, confusion, and self-preservation. Each story is an attempt to make sense of an act that defies logic, morality, and human decency. But as mental health professionals, we know that understanding Defoe's motives, whether financial, emotional, or psychological, can never truly erase the devastation left behind. 6 innocent lives were taken that night, and the ripple effects of those murders have haunted not just the Defoe family, but an entire community. The tragedy of Ronald DeFoe Jr. isn't just the horror of the murders. It's the deeper story of a fractured mind, a life shaped by fear, anger, and unresolved trauma. Could there have been a moment of intervention, a way to prevent these chains of events? What might have been different if someone had seen the signs earlier? While we may never fully understand the true motive behind Defoe's actions, one thing is certain. Mental health is at the heart of this tragedy, and it's a reminder of the importance of addressing emotional turmoil before it spirals into violence. My analysis. Analyzing a case like Ronald DeFoe Jr.'s, it's clear that multiple psychological factors could contribute to the motivations behind such horrific act. Though Defoe's exact diagnosis remains speculative, his actions and subsequent shifting narratives suggest a combination of mental health conditions that may have influenced his behavior. Defoe likely suffered from antisocial personality disorder, as indicated by his lack of empathy, disregard for social norms, and violent behavior. People with ASPD often engage in manipulative, deceitful behavior without feeling remorse, traits that align with his ability to murder his family and continue his daily routine as if nothing had happened. His involvement with drugs like heroin and LSD may have also exacerbated his impulsivity and aggression. Defoe's troubled relationship with his father and the abusive dynamics within his family point to a lifetime of emotional distress and trauma, which may have led to intermittent explosive disorder, or IED. This condition is characterized by a sudden intense burst of anger and violence, sometimes over relatively minor conflicts. His own admission that once he started, he just couldn't stop, suggests an inability to control his rage once it was triggered. Defoe's changing stories about the murders raise questions about his grasp on reality, hinting at a potential dissociative disorder or delusional thinking. The fabrication of alternate narratives, like claiming his sister or mother committed some of the murders, may reflect an attempt to disassociate from the emotional impact of his crimes, which can occur in individuals experiencing severe trauma or mental disintegration. Defoe's substance abuse, dysfunctional family relationships, and potential trauma from his upbringing likely contributed to the development of these mental health conditions. The combination of these factors can create a perfect storm where pent-up anger, impaired impulse control, and deep-seated psychological wounds explode into extreme violence, such as the murder of one's own family. Treating antisocial personality disorder and intermittent explosive disorder presents a unique challenge, as both involve deeply ingrained patterns of behavior, impulse control issues, and difficulties with emotional regulation. However, with comprehensive long-term therapeutic interventions, individuals with these conditions can learn to manage their symptoms more effectively. The goal would be to provide structured evidence-based treatments that target specific aspects of each disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is characterized by a pervasive disregard for the rights of others, manipulation, impulsivity, and a lack of empathy or remorse. Treating ASPD requires a multifaceted approach, as these individuals may be resistant to therapy and have difficulty forming trusting relationships. The focus is on increasing emotional awareness, improving social functioning, and reducing harmful behaviors. Techniques such as cognitive restructuring can help the individual challenge these justifications they use for exploiting others or breaking the rules. Role-playing exercises and empathy training can also be incorporated to help clients begin to understand the perspectives of others, though this can be difficult due to the emotional detachment often seen in ASPD. Mindfulness and distress tolerance strategies are taught to increase emotional regulation and reduce impulsive decision-making. Interpersonal effectiveness skills can help clients learn how to engage more appropriately in social situations while reducing their reliance on manipulation and aggression. Intermittent explosive disorder is marked by sudden episodes of intense aggression or violent behavior, often disproportionate to the situation. Individuals with IED typically feel remorse after these outbursts, making treatment a mix of anger management, impulse control techniques, and emotional regulation strategies. Anger management techniques teach the individual to recognize early warning signs of anger and develop healthier ways to cope with frustration. Thought-stopping techniques and positive self-talk can interrupt the cycle of escalating anger. Relaxation training and deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation can reduce physical symptoms of anger before they spiral into violent outbursts. Behavioral rehearsals and role-playing can help individuals practice alternative responses to situations that would typically provoke an outburst. By simulating high-stress scenarios, clients can practice using their new coping skills in a safe environment. For both antisocial personality disorder and intermittent explosive disorder, group therapy can be useful in creating a supportive environment where individuals can learn from others facing similar challenges. Group settings encourage accountability, offer opportunities to practice social skills, and provide feedback in a non-judgmental space. Therapy for ASPD and IED is long-term and requires patience, as these conditions are complex and deeply rooted in the individual's behavioral patterns. Success depends on an individual's willingness to engage in treatment and the therapist's ability to build a trusting relationship. With a tailored, structured approach focusing on emotional regulation, impulse control, and cognitive restructuring, individuals with ASPD and IED can learn to manage their symptoms and lead a more productive, socially appropriate lives. The case of Ronald DeFoe Jr. leaves us with unsettling questions about the complexity of the human mind and the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness. DeFoe's actions were not only shaped by his internal psychological struggles, but also by the dysfunctional dynamics within his family and the pressures he faced. His unstable mental state, potentially influenced by antisocial personality disorder and intermittent explosive disorder, substance abuse, and unresolved trauma, culminated in a tragedy that could have been preventable with early intervention and support. In hindsight, DeFoe's shifting narratives, his strained relationship with his father, and his history of substance abuse all point to a significant mental health red flags that went unaddressed. His story serves as a reminder of the importance of recognizing and treating the emotional and psychological turmoil that can manifest in violence if left untreated. While we may never fully understand what drove DeFoe to commit such a horrific act, his case highlights the necessity of providing mental health care for individuals struggling with intense emotional and psychological issues. Had these warning signs been identified and treated earlier, the outcome may have been very different. In the end, the story of Ronald DeFoe Jr. is a tragic testament to a far-reaching effects of mental illness, trauma, and the importance of timely intervention. It is a reminder that mental health should never be overlooked, and that compassionate care and understanding can sometimes be the key to preventing unimaginable tragedies.